All right, I hope you're having a good Labor Day weekend. As I'm going through this video, you'll want to have out your reading notes sheet from that page 108 to 112, as we're going to be looking at the breakdown of this relationship. I know that you're already reading about the Declaration of Independence and those first steps of revolution, but I'm going to focus in this video on continuing to build up toward the causes of that. So what you're looking at here is an image of a cooler that's used to transplant organs, human organs, right? So you go from one hospital, you harvest the organs from somebody, and you bring them to another place where they can be used in somebody who needs them. The reason that I use this is this concept of transplant. So you have England having a transplant society. They bring people from England to the New World, and that separation, right, that geographic separation, over time builds something new in the New World, to the point where the first people who go there very much view themselves as English. But once their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are born in America, they start to view themselves as something a little bit different. And so I want to build the case for what leads to the Declaration of Independence and what leads to the American Revolution, while also continuing to think about this dual blame. How do we blame England? How do we blame the colonies for the breakdown of this relationship? So we're going to do a little reviewing, and we're going to look at some new things here today, but our objective here in this video is to try to explain, or to put you in a position to be able to explain, why Parliament did not understand the colonists' argument, no taxation without representation. So let's do a little reviewing. This is what the American colonies looked like as of 1763. And we know that this land was gained as a result of the French and Indian War. We also know that for the colonists, this was very important, because as we looked at these numbers, we know that the colonies had an increasing population, to the point where the land that they were being confined to, or their colonies, they needed to expand because they had more people than the land could support. They were looking to move into the West. The victory in the French and Indian War, which looks more like this for England, seems to allow for that. So when we're looking at this map, or when you see this map combined with this map, the key to understanding this and thinking about blame is, well, the colonies are believing that they have a right to move into this West because, well, they contributed to the war effort, and this is what they won. The British have this big picture idea that the colonies are a part of, but they have to think about the whole empire. And that becomes important when we consider, that the British won the war and the colonies are on the side of that. However, we know that the British spent a lot of money financing that war. And so they're vulnerable because they don't have as much wealth as they need to be able to defend themselves. So the British have to find ways to cut their expenses, like we talked about, and to bring in money quick. The colonists, they want their land. Everything else is England's problem. So I want you to think about this, and maybe what you would write down in your notebook. So we have a difference in perspective, right? The British are thinking, what do we have to do to get to repair and prepare the empire for success? The colonists are only thinking about themselves. Now, if we look at mercantilism, right? We know the basics about mercantilism. I saw in your quick reflections that we did at the beginning of class on Friday that you all got 9s on. You understand mercantilism. And what I want you to think about right now, and maybe write down an idea or two, or even a question or two, is the colonists are not thinking about the empire, right? They're thinking about themselves. They're thinking about their own interests. They're thinking about just here. The British are thinking about this whole empire. I want you to think about how the pendulum effect that we've been talking about might have played a role in this. What has led the colonists to being so interested in just what's important to them? Why aren't they thinking about and understanding the bigger picture of the empire? And so let's look at some of the things, I'm jumping around there. Let's look at some of the things that happened, and we're just going to do a few, after the French and Indian War, and we're going to be thinking about this from the perspective of the colonists. And then we're going to try to switch this to trying to think about it from the Parliament's point of view. So first of all, they try to go west. The Indians are there. They need help. So what did the colonists believe was their right? To move west. Why did England do what they do? Well, because they couldn't afford to protect them. So what England does is they draw a line on the map, you see this red line, and they tell the colonists, until further notice, you may not go west. If you're thinking in terms of mercantilism and you're thinking in terms of the empire, you should think, okay, that's what's in the best interest of the empire. But we know the colonists are angry by this because they are thinking about themselves. This is followed up by a decision by the Parliament to tax the colonies. The Stamp Act is probably the best example. It's the one we used in class, right? And one question that I would ask you is, do you know the difference between a direct tax and an indirect tax? And if I look right above me right now, and I'm sure that I'm explaining it to you. Why are the colonists so against paying their share of running the empire? And this goes back to that Stamp Act Resolution number 3, right? They are not consenting to it. They believe they don't have anybody representing them, so how can they be taxed? This is a concept I'd like you to take a note on, because Parliament says you are represented. You are a part of the empire. Parliament thinks about the empire, and so they are representing you. The colonists look at it differently. They think, no, we should have somebody from the colonies representing us there. And that's where we start to see, a real fracture in the relationship. It gets so ugly that when England tries to collect their taxes and they pass new taxes, the colonists no longer just write down their grievances. They start to actually react physically. They start to do things. Local tax collectors are punished. They are outcasts. So England starts to send over tax collectors. Well, all that does is intensify the anger that the colonists feel towards England. The image that you have here is a tax collector being tarred and feathered, which is, the image doesn't make it look nearly as bad as it actually was, and we could talk a little bit about that in class on Tuesday. But what was the British government supposed to do? They need money. They're going to tax their citizens. They believe they have the right to do that, and this is the reaction they're getting. What are they supposed to do? And so they start to send over tax collectors. When the tax collectors are abused, they feel like they have to start sending over troops to protect the tax collectors, to protect their right, in their view, to tax their citizens. Well, once the colonists start to see this, this is escalating the damage in the relationship. And the colonists start to divide into groups. And those groups, and this is roughly accurate. I'm sorry, I'm going to move this back down. If you take the colonial population, about 1/3 of them we would define as patriots. So people who are against England's moves. Doesn't necessarily mean they want their own country. They just, at this point, they want to be heard and they want change. Another third we would call loyalists, where they believe England does have the right to do what they're doing. They are loyal to the government, and they maybe don't even necessarily like what their counterparts, the colonists, the patriots, are doing. And then there's another third who are kind of indifferent. And the way that we would explain this, and if you're not sure about what I'm about to say here, this should be a question you would write down in the middle. The truth is that not all of these people are English. And so imagine that some of them are, let's say, Dutch, or imagine that some of them are German, or some of them are Scotch-Irish, right? When we get down here, those people aren't necessarily concerned with the politics between colonies and England. They're just here living their life. So as England tries harder and harder to defend what it believes is its right to govern the colonies, so think about that pendulum swinging all the way back, right? All the way back where England is completely involved in the colonies. They send tax collectors. They send troops to protect the tax collectors. Now they have to send even more troops to try to guard against what they're starting to view as rebellion. Not revolution, but rebellion. And once we have this gathering of troops, it's only a matter of time before the tensions between the two sides has a trigger. And one of the great triggers at the outset of the American Revolution is what's depicted here in this engraving, which is the Boston Massacre. And the Boston Massacre, it's an important trigger moment because it gives the colonies a tangible moment where what they were viewing as tyranny, what they were viewing as oppression, actually results in the loss of colonial life, an attack by their mother country on the colonies. Now, if we look at all of this from the British perspective, we go back, right? The British perspective, they need to stop spending money. They can't send troops to protect them. They need to collect revenue. They need to tax their citizens. The colonists are their citizens. They have citizens who are openly rebelling against their tax collectors. They have citizens who are beginning to organize against the government. All of this looks very much like treason. All of it looks very much like things that should not be happening in a civil society. And so it's very difficult for them, the English, to understand what the colonists believe they have the right to do when they believe their rights supersede them. The colonists are forgetting their role. The colonists aren't living up to their role. And so in the end, this idea of no taxation without representation, for England, they believe the only interest that needs representation is the benefit of the empire. And that is what Parliament is doing. And the colonists are a part of that empire. And so as the Parliament government governs the empire, the colonists are a part of that, whether that means they're being protected or it means they're being limited, whether it means they're not being taxed or they need to be taxed. The colonists don't see it that way. And I could go back to these images. The perspective for the colonists have changed. They don't see themselves or think of themselves first as a part of this. They see themselves as a part of this. And once that happens, it's very difficult to find a way back to pure mercantilism, to a relationship that works between mother country and colonies. So what we're going to do on Tuesday is we're going to start by continuing that fishbone activity where we're building blame. And there's plenty of blame to go on both sides. And I'm hoping that maybe some of that's becoming clearer for you. And I'm going to need you to help me out, more of you to help me out in building that fishbone for class. And then we'll move into how this all devolves or evolves, depending on which side you're looking at, into the American Revolution. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday.